This week on the Communicators, a discussion on how the Internet is being used to provide transparency in the workings of government. Our guest is Ellen Miller of the Sunlight Foundation.
Ellen Miller is the Executive Director of the Sunlight Foundation and also the co-founder, and she's our guest this week on the Communicators to talk about politics, money, and technology. Pedro Echeverria, producer of the Communicators, is joining in the questioning this week. Ms. Miller, if you could start by telling us what the Sunlight Foundation is and what it does.
Sure. Well, the Sunlight Foundation is a 3-year-old nonprofit, nonpartisan institution that was designed to create greater transparency for the work of the U.S. government using new technology. The Internet and the technologies that underlie it are at the heart of every single thing that we do. And we're interested in transparency, particularly data and information about government, and using the technology to put it into the hands of citizens where it really belongs.
And how do you use that technology, and what kind of technology do you use?
Well, we use, there's several pieces to it. I mean, one, at sort of the core of our work, is making sure that information produced and about the U.S. Congress and the executive branch and the regulatory agencies is available online in a 24/7 fashion, the way we expect to find any information these days. And so the very first thing that Sunlight set out to do was to digitize information that was only available in paper form. So we created a number of grants to organizations like OpenSecrets.org or FollowTheMoney.org, places that follow campaign finance information, lobbying information, revolving door information, or digitize personal financial disclosure forms. So that getting that information, that data online in usable form was sort of our first goal, and then developing tools on top of it so that any citizen could understand, sometimes, you know, in the blink of an eye, or, you know, in a somewhat more complicated fashion, exactly what was in this information. So we created websites like OpenCongress.org, where tens of thousands of people now go to get information about pieces of legislation, not interpreted information, but actually text of bills, where they're allowed to comment on legislation and see what other people are writing about legislation, and indeed even write to their legislators about information. So we've created databases and tools and websites on top of that to enable anybody, public, journalists, bloggers, citizen journalists, to have access to information about what's going on in our government.
And I want to come back to Open Congress, but I also wanted to ask, is this information not put online by departments in the federal government or by the Congress?
Well, it's a mixed bag. Some information you can only find in the basement of an obscure, or perhaps not so obscure, government agency or office of the U.S. Congress. And it's just in paper form, and unless you live in Washington or you have a high-priced lobbyist, you can't get access to that. So some of that we actually give grants to have digitized. But other information is available, but you have to be the most intrepid of researchers to find it online. And then sometimes it's available online in a fixed PDF form, so you can't create a database out of it and look for the similarities, look for, you know, who might be the highest paid lobbyist, or, you know, who's, you know, what government, foreign government, for example, might be spending the most money on hiring lobbyists. So the idea is to bring it together and make it digestible and available online where citizens today get their information.
Can you give an example of how that works? A policy, something about government that people want to find out about, but in a sense wouldn't be able to find out through their own research?
Sure. Well, one example, something we're releasing actually next week, has to do with foreign lobbyists, that is to say, Americans who lobby on behalf of foreign governments. And so we have created a database with an investigative nonprofit called ProPublica, which will allow citizens to take a database which exists on paper in the basement of the Justice Department. We made an actual database out of it and allows citizens, journalists, researchers to actually search through country by country or legislator by legislator who was lobbied by these foreign or by these lobbyists. You could actually look by lobbyist as well. So it puts a wealth of information about how our laws get made into the hands of citizens. Another example, a more sort of simple example, is that we took the congressional record, which is actually available online. The congressional record every single day has as many words in it as the Tale of Two Cities. So who is going to read that? And we created a site called Capital Words, in which you can actually research and see, or actually the research is done for you. You click on, you say, what was the most popular word of the day yesterday? And you can actually tell what Congress was talking about yesterday. You can also search that by your legislator, your delegation. And so it's a very interesting insight for citizens to understand actually what was Congress talking about yesterday.
Well, just to follow up on that very quickly, what is metadata tagging and semantic technology? Does that fit into what you're talking about?
Well, it does very much. I mean, that's a very sophisticated way of looking. I mean, metadata is data about data. So that may sound somewhat esoteric, but so the issue I think for data is, how do you know what you're looking for? How can you find what you're looking for? So if I want all data about campaign finance, that would be, in a sense, you could regard that as metadata. But if I want data about the campaign finance contributions to this member of Congress, you can dig deep into a single database. So Sunlight is trying to create collections of data, mashing data together so that you can have a bigger picture of the data and what its impact might be.
What processes does your organization then go through to make sure this information is presented just as it is and not interpreted like you talked about at the beginning?
Right. Well, data is data. So the organizations that we mostly fund to create data have long-standing reputations in taking data that comes out of government and then putting that into searchable data formats and not playing with data at all, not interpreting the data at all. So whether that's opensecrets.org or followthemoney.org or fedspending.org, which is run by an organization called OMB Watch, this is just the facts. It's just the data. There's no interpretation, on this data. So and even on the databases that we create ourselves. So we have a database that we've created. It's a small one, but no one's ever done it before, called Party Time. And this has to do with the fundraising events that members of Congress hold to raise money for their campaigns. We actually take the invitations themselves that we receive from all kinds of sources all around the city, and we have an interface created so that we can enter the data ourselves into it, and then we put the original invitation also up online. So if anyone ever doubts the database information, they can actually go back and look at the original invitation. And the value of this is, invitations for fundraising kinds of events are sponsored by certain lobbyists. So in this database, you can search by which lobbyists have actually sponsored more of these fundraisers, and do they have connections to, or do they represent interests that have connections to the committees on which members sit? So you get a richness of data when you create some of these databases and you show the original documents as well as the data themselves.
What are people interested in from the traffic that you see going to the site?
Well, at the moment, you mean in terms of political party time or
just information they're looking for?
Well, today it's healthcare, of course. So yesterday, tens of thousands of people went to opencongress.org to begin to understand the facts of the healthcare debate themselves. We know that there's a lot of disinformation, and it's hard for anybody to tell what's true. But so Open Congress has the bill that is the most obvious vehicle at the moment.
H.R. 3200?
H.R. 3200. If people are looking for information on this bill and they go to Google and they type in H.R. 3200, the first thing that pops up is a link to opencongress.org. They can go to that bill, they can see all 1,000 pages, they can comment on this bill. And so it gives an opportunity for people to actually dig in and see whether they can find, some of the kinds of allegations that have been made about what's in this bill or what's not in this bill.
Just to follow up there, could they search out the word death panel? That's
yes,
one of the issues that's been discussed.
They absolutely can look for the word death panel, and I don't believe they'll find it. But I think the opportunity for citizens to get the facts themselves, this is what the new technology offers. I mean, this is the connected age. We don't any longer need expert filters because each of us in our own way can gather the information to become our own lobbyist. And not only that, the new technology, other technologies that we use like Twitter, the messaging service. Members of Congress are on Twitter. Tens of millions of Americans are on Twitter. So you can go to an open Congress, get the facts, have some questions, go to find your Twitter account for your members of Congress. Hundreds of them are on Twitter, and ask them a direct question. And I bet they respond, because it's that kind of personal medium. So the technology enables us to not only get information into the hands of citizens without filters, without spin or analysis, but it also enables citizens to ask questions directly and be in direct one-on-one conversation with their lawmakers or their elected officials.
Ellen Miller, you mentioned that this is, if you typed in HR 3200, this is the first one that pops up on Google. Do you have to pay for that?
No, not at all.
Why is it the first one then?
Because of the popularity of the use. The algorithms I understand that Google uses, or that search engines use generally, have to do with where traffic is flowing, and they pick up on that, and then you rise in rank according to that in terms of the search engine.
What if somebody wanted to search health lobbyists and members of Congress and compare that and see who is supporting HR 3200 or who is opposed to it?
I don't know what they'd find. But they could they could end up on a site like opensecrets.org, which has a database on lobbyists. And they could, at that site, then type in the words healthcare lobbyists and find the information on all healthcare lobbyists. Or they could end up on another site that we have funded called littlesis.org, which is described as an involuntary Facebook for the powerful. And this is a wiki site in which people are right now focusing on revolving door lobbyists in the healthcare industry. So people are doing their own research. They are adding information to this wiki on people who used to work for members of Congress and who are now currently healthcare lobbyists. So this is another side of what technology allows you to do, which is to pull this wisdom of the crowd and to enlarge your staff and your information sources. I don't know who's contributing on this website, but let's assume for the moment that it's other members of Congress or other staff, and they're saying, well, so and so used to work for such and such office, and providing that kind of information. So there are lots of sources of information, and what the search engines then do will direct you in different directions.
How much traffic have you seen since the start?
Traffic has surged. I mean, every time there's a popular bill, traffic surges dramatically on opencongress.org. And the traffic also surged dramatically with people creating their own accounts so that they can receive alerts about particular pieces of legislation they might be interested in following. They can find other people who are interested in issues. So last year's biggest bill was actually about unemployment insurance. So people were looking for information about unemployment insurance, ended up on Open Congress, left their comments about the bill and what they thought about the bill. And it's, the other interesting thing about the technology, it's really counterintuitive, it's all quite civil. It seems like it's a heck of a lot more civil than what's going on in the town hall meetings right now. But there is a certain level of collaboration and interest and sharing of knowledge and information that the technology sort of, enables people to have civil dialogue. So
you can have boards that people post one opinion or another of what they're reading or finding out information about.
Yeah, absolutely. They're actually not boards. They're actually just a very simple comment system on Open Congress that allows people to comment about what they think about particular sections of the bill. Sunlight created a site, again, using new technology. We did this last year. Someone asked us to create a bill about what greater government transparency would look like. And so our lobbyist developed a piece of legislation that had some new ideas in it, but also gathered up some of the other very good ideas that have been pending in Congress for a long time. And she put it on my desk, and she said, well, why don't you look through this? And I said, goodness, I don't really know anything about, this area or that area. I said, let's put it online and ask people if they will review this for us. And so they did. So we put it up section by section. We allowed people to comment on it. And it was an unbelievably interesting experience. We learned a lot, and we engaged people that we never knew before in the process of developing legislation. And we think that's a very promising venue. I mean, I'm not suggesting that all legislation needs to be developed this way, but the notion of having legislation online for a detailed look by citizens who are interested is is something, is really an idea whose time has come, and the technology enables it. We do, Sunlight does have an advocacy side of what we do as well, because while we are in the business at the moment of creating databases out of government information and then providing tools to access that, it's not really the nonprofit's responsibility to do that. This is government's responsibility. And so we have an advocacy program to try to convince government, whether it's the executive branch or Congress, to put more information online themselves. And so one of our platforms is actually something we call readthebill.org, which is, we're asking Congress to put all legislation online for public consideration for 72 hours before it's considered. And we think that this will not only enable members of Congress to read the legislation, but for citizens to weigh in and tell members of Congress what they actually think about it.
This is the Communicators program on C-SPAN. Our guest is Ellen Miller, who is the Executive Director and co-founder of the Sunlight Foundation. What is the business model of the Sunlight Foundation?
Well, Sunlight was founded based on several large investors in it. The co-founder is a Washington businessman and lawyer named Michael Klein, and he approached me in the founding of Sunlight. And together, well, his approach was really, what do we do to put the tools and information in the hands of journalists and citizens so they can understand more what's happening in Congress in particular. We started with a focus exclusively on Congress. And we talked with many journalists and practitioners, and then some longtime colleagues of mine from the Personal Democracy Forum in New York. Mika Sifry and Andrew Richey both said to us, look, there is an intersection that is happening between technology and political information, and we need to understand that and grab hold of it. And so we created Sunlight, and Michael Klein was the first investor, to try to bring the political information and the technology together, and we've been very experimental since then. Our largest funder is Omidyar Network, and they have given Sunlight over the 3 years of our existence $8 million, have invested heavily in us. We receive other money as well. We have a contract with the Pew Charitable Trust to build something called subsidyscope.org, a huge database, first time anybody's ever tried it, of all government subsidies. Information about subsidies that we're all very interested in because it's a huge, spending item, assumes a huge amount of our budget. No one's ever tried to put this information together in one single place, and so subsidyscope.com exists. We're building it out sort of sector by sector. The first sector is on the bank bailout money.
And is it online?
It is online right now, and you can, in the bank bailout money, you can actually search down to your local bank and find out whether your local bank has received money. So this is a very exciting website. The next subsidy sector that will go up will be about transportation. So all kinds of subsidies about transportation. So Pew is another very large funder of ours. The Knight Foundation has just given us a grant to build out tools and widgets for journalists to use. The Open Society Institute has provided money for training of journalists, and we trained more than 1,000 journalists on all these databases last year.
On the first day of his administration, this president said he wanted to be the most transparent administration ever and wanted to use technology to do that. How's he doing on that?
I think it's a bit of a mixed bag. There's some terrific things that have been done, and there's some things that are not coming quite as quickly as we'd like. So the directive on day one or day two of his administration was a hugely important step because it planted a flag saying we want to be transparent, we want to use technology to create this transparency and collaboration and citizen engagement. And so that is a standard to which we can hold all of the administration's efforts to. I think another huge step forward was the creation of data.gov. So data.gov is a single website which will unfold, of course, over several years, which will provide a catalog and access to all government data. It will have it all in one place. You'll be able to search it by the topic and the interest that you're interested in. Two major steps forward. I would say transparency in terms of the White House operations, a detailed daily schedule of what the president and senior staff do. We haven't seen that, and that, I think, would tell us a lot about what's going on. But the administration is using some of the new technology, whether it's YouTube, which is not so new, or some of the interactive ways to dialogue with the president in press conferences. They're experimenting in that way, and some of those experiments work better than others. But it's certainly, in terms of the administration's use of technology, we're seeing a lot of that. But we need to see it, in more, sort of genuine ways. I think there's the White House's use of technology, and then there is the message they send to the administration. There is no question that at the top levels of all of the agencies and departments, they understand that technology is key in building trust in their work, and they understand that they want to do that. But then there is a sort of cultural resistance beneath the top layer, which is making it a slow road in terms of fruition.
Cultural resistance primarily by whom?
Well, I think it's the middle-level bureaucrats. We certainly see it on Capitol Hill as well, who are not used to giving out this data. They think of it as their data and their information, and not, for public consumption. I mean, that is the way it is. It's hard to understand quite why. I mean, was it Thomas Jefferson who said information is power? And certainly members on Capitol Hill understand that information is power, so they want to keep it close. But what's happening is that those barriers are falling down, because citizens expect to be able to find what they want to find online 24/7. If I want to make a plane reservation at 2 o'clock in the morning, or buy a book at 11 p.m., or order some other item at 6 a.m., I can do that. And the same kind of thing is what people want in terms of their political information. There was a fairly recent Pew study that demonstrated that huge numbers of people, double in the last election cycle over the previous cycle, went online to get political information in the last election cycle. And I think that was something like 50 million people. And we estimate that, based on those numbers and others, that about 25 million didn't just go to get information, they stayed to create information. Maybe they wrote a blog post, or maybe they left a comment, or maybe they sent an electronic message to their member of Congress, or, to an agency or department. And 25 million people do this kind of thing. This is a huge mass of interested people. And so our theory is you put this information into their hands, invite them to collaborate, and they will.
Speaking of Congress, though, how is Congress doing on putting information online?
Well, it's maybe a little bit more challenging than the executive, but we actually have had two projects. One is, well, they're both really ongoing. One is called the Open House Project, and the other is called the Open Senate Project, which has been a collaborative online effort of maybe somewhere between 500 and 700 people to identify easy ways for the House and the Senate to use technology to come into the 21st century, to put more information online, make it available. We've had great receptivity in the House, both by the Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, and by John Boehner, the Minority Leader, and by Senator Reid, the Majority Leader in the Senate as well, to this project. We delivered the House results some time ago, and we've been working through the various Rules Committee to get some of these ideas enacted. They're easy things. The Senate is more difficult. For example, one of our advocacy projects is to push forward a piece of legislation called 482, S482, which would require the Senate to file their campaign finance reports electronically. The House has done it for years. There is no reason for the Senate not to file their campaign finance reports electronically. They keep them on the computers, they print them out, then they hand them to the Federal Election Commission that spends $250,000 every year rekeying them, making mistakes, and of course slowing down the process. Now, I wasn't born yesterday. I know that slowing down of the process is what they want. And so we put a lot of pressure, and we think Congress actually will, the Senate actually will pass this S482, and we've mounted a major campaign to try to get them to do it. They've never done it before. They're reluctant. What does it mean when you invite the public in that kind of direct way? And I think they have to get used to it. But there are lots of members who do understand the change of technology and how it enhances their ability to communicate with constituents.
And I was going to follow up. Do you see more of these members making these moves to talk about their own actions, their own contributions, their own associations via technology on an individual basis?
Yes, absolutely. Well, you know, more and more members are going on to Twitter, which is sort of the most direct way to communicate with people yet. More of them are using video cameras. More of them are getting more sophisticated in interactivity on their Senate and House websites. And so there is a growing appreciation for this. And you know, it's not all just the younger members who are coming in. We see some of the, you know, the older members, or members of long standing is maybe the more polite way to put it, who begin to understand that this will increase their constituents' trust in what they're doing. There are a number of members of Congress who now post their official calendars online. And so you can see who they meet with. It's only 7 or 8 of them to date, but we think this is an idea that, that members see will increase trust. So I'm a member of Congress, I have nothing to hide. You can see that I meet with lobbyists on this issue and lobbyists on that issue, people I agree with, people I don't agree with, and how much time I spend in committee meetings, how much time I spend meeting with my staff, et cetera. So, you know, disclosing calendars is another thing that we see members, you know, starting to do.
Ellen Miller, you've been in business for 3 years with Sunlight Foundation. How has the technology already changed, and what is the next generation of technology?
Well, I don't think anybody can predict what's next, but I would have to say that at least once a day, if not twice a day, someone will send to me a new piece of technology that they'll say, can we use this in some way? So there's a program called Gapminder, and it's a motion chart of, it's a motion chart. So you can click, you know, once you create it, and you can see, you know, a swell of, you know, information that you might, you know, put on this. Or, so we used it actually to create a chart of real estate, finance, insurance, and real estate contributions to Democrats and Republicans over a 10 or 15-year period. And literally, with the click of a button, in less than 15 seconds, you understand the growth of these campaign contributions, which may or may not have led or had an impact on members of Congress and the current financial scandal. And so it's a way of illustrating it. Or, you know, we looked at Earth marks. It's a project we have called Earth Marks. We used Google Earth, new technology in the last couple of years, and we put earmarks on top of Google Earth. And we were told, and not in at least one, if not more instances, that members of Congress came out of their office and said, "What do you mean you can fly over the earmarks in my district?" And indeed, you could. And, you know, it's a visualization. That's a tool that enables, you know, people to understand, smile a little bit, but fundamentally understand really what's going on. There are examples of this day after day after day of, you know, the creative talent online in terms of the technologies is, it appears to be limitless. And so we see these all the time, and we think, you know, how can we use this?
Final question.
How would you gauge success for the Sunlight Foundation?
2 ways. First and foremost, we want to see government adaptation of the notion that it is their responsibility to provide government information for its citizens. So in a sense, we think of data.gov as already a success. USAspending.gov was built on a website that we funded. It was literally exactly the same code. That's a success. So the shifting of responsibility to government to provide this information is absolutely a measure of success. And then secondly, citizen use of this information. So we want to see more and more citizens coming to the Open Congresses or the maplight.orgs or other sites that we both fund and create. To that end, we've done a number of projects like Apps for America, asking citizens to create applications on top of data to demonstrate their usefulness.
Ellen Miller has been our guest on the Communicators. SunlightFoundation.com is the gateway site for all of the different sites that she has mentioned. She was also the founder of the Center for Responsive Politics and Public Campaign. Thank you very much.
Thank you.